In this video, I'm going to talk about the elevation and section drawings that are part of this assignment. I'm in the floor plan drawing that I had done previously, and I'm going to continue in the same file. The first thing I'm going to do is set up a space in which to draw these two drawings. Again, it's an elevation and a section drawing. And I'll use the projection method, which basically permits me to track lines down. And so I don't have to keep remeasuring and redrawing in that way. I can use some information that's already there. So the first thing I'm going to do is set the current layer to the grid layer. I think you may have one called X grid, whatever you use to draw the grid that you've already got in place. And then I'm going to start drawing some guidelines down below the floor plan, right? This first one, and I'm going to set ortho, so that's on. I'm going to type in 48 feet, and then I'm going to press to enter into the line command again, and draw another line that's also 48 feet down. And I'll just connect across. And I need one midway here, so I can draw a line from the midpoint to the other midpoint. So now I am ready to begin projecting some lines down. Now I'm going to go ahead and create the layers that are shown here in the assignment page. And then I will continue with my drawing. So I won't go through this in the video, and go ahead and create these layers using the layer manager. So as you can see, I've created these 4 layers at the top of the list. And I've just added one additional layer, and we'll be using that for our projection lines. So you can set it to any color, and then make sure you click on the button that tells it not to print. So here I am back in the CAD file. There's the line projection lines, or the layer of projection lines. The color is set to 250, and I think it's a little too close to the background color. But I want it to be somewhat dark so it doesn't kind of come forward against that black background. So I'm going to choose a color that is relatively dark, but not so dark that I can't see it against the model space background. Now we're done with the layer manager. And now I'm going to set my layer to that new layer called projection lines. All right, we will start with drawing the elevation. So I'm going to begin pulling lines down that will be appearing in the elevation drawing. Now keep in mind the difference between these two types of drawings. An elevation is like you're standing outside of the building looking straight at it. So in other words, your line of sight is perpendicular to the face of the building. A section, on the other hand, is like a cut made through the building and then showing what you see on the inside. Our elevation will be on the lower part here, and our section will be on this upper part. So as I mentioned, I'm going to start with the elevation drawing, and I will begin pulling some lines down. Now I would start with the lines that are major elements of that show the shape of the building. So I'm going to click on this corner here and draw my line down. And these are set to not print, but you can erase them if you like. You may find that there's too many lines and things start to get a little confusing. All right, so from this side of the building, this is the south side. I can see this part right here, this face right here, and a little bit of this part of the plan. So I'll go ahead and draw that one down too. All right, now I'm going to switch my layer to the layer called A section profile. Now, this is color number 4. And if you remember, let me open up the layer properties and open up the colors. with our ccc.ctv file, the way it works, if I put anything on color with color red, it would print the heaviest, like a really thick line. And then they gradually get thinner, 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 thinner until we get to these very thin ones down here at the end. This is somewhere in the middle, but at the scale that we're going to be printing, this should be heavy enough. We're going to be using this layer to indicate our cut lines, and also the line that represents the top of the ground. So let me close this. And as you can see with the check mark, that's my current layer. Close this, close this. I'm going to draw a line from this point to this point. Okay, now I just drew a line on top of a line. So technically I could have just taken the line and changed its layer. So anyway, either way is fine. Now, one other thing that I'm going to do before I get too much further, I want to make sure that these lines don't move around on me. So I'm going to lock them. This is maybe something you haven't done yet. This is the layer X grid, and there's a little lock symbol. I'm going to click on that. Right now, if I tried to move this, it wouldn't let me. All right. Now, another thing to keep in mind is this. The heights for architectural elements are based on many reasons why things would be a certain height. Some of them are construction standards, like, for example, the 8-foot height of a typical room in modern construction has to do with kind of the efficiency of building materials. Sheets of drywall are 8 feet high, for example. So that means you don't have to cut little extra pieces. So in maybe more expensive homes, you'll find higher ceilings, or in older homes, you'll find higher ceilings. But that requires a little bit more use of materials, perhaps more waste of materials, and more labor and installation. So in order to get the heights of this elevation, first of all, I'm going to offset this line right here, and then I'll move it to a different layer. All right, so we're going to assume that we have 8-foot high floor to ceiling heights plus 12 inches of structure. Now, of course, those dimensions all depend on what you're building out of and many other factors, but just for the purposes of this exercise. So that means that the edge of the roof, and we're just going to make a house that has flat roofs. If you want to experiment with pitched roofs and all of that, that's fine. But the whole goal of this is really to get a little bit of practice using projection methods and measurements and those sorts of things. So my 8-foot floor to ceiling plus my 12 inches of roof structure means 9 feet. So I'm going to offset 9 feet, 9 with a tick mark, enter. I'm going to pick this line, and then I'm going to pick a point above it so it offsets above the line. Okay. Now I'm also going to change my layer again to A elevation heavy. Okay. Why that layer? Basically, these again are the major building elements. These changes in profile of the building shape. So I want them to be a relatively heavy layer, but not quite as heavy as the ground line. The ground line is always going to be the heaviest line in an elevation drawing, right? So now I'll type in line, and I'm just going to begin connecting these points and drawing over some of those projection lines, okay? So now I have this shape right here, which is basically this surface. I have this one here, which is this one, and I have this one here, which is just that little bit that shows past the corner here. And those are the major lines of the elevation. Now in my elevation, I also have some windows drawn, and we haven't really talked about like what these windows maybe look like. You could draw a rather standard window, which might start about 3 feet above the ground and go maybe up to 7 feet. Sometimes the tops of windows align with the typical height of a door, so that when you look at the elevation, the top of the window is at the same height as the top of the door. It just kind of gives a little orderly, consistent look. For residential projects, they're typically going to be 6 feet 8 inches or 7 feet. Probably 6 feet 8 is more common. All right, now I'm going to erase this line here, and I'm going to start thinking about the other elements that are appearing on this drawing. So for one thing, I've got these windows and I've got some doors and things like that. None of the doors will show in my plan. If I had a door on this space, I would draw that. But since I don't, I'll be just adding these windows. I'll show you an example of how a door might look also though. So when it comes to door heights for residential architecture, they tend to be either 6 feet 8 or 7 feet high. For this project, I'm going to make them 7 feet above the ground, and I'm going to make the sills 36 inches. So in order to do that, I will go ahead and offset 36 or 3 feet. And if the door itself is 7 feet, that means the frame would be another, whatever the distance of the frame is high, it will be, you would add that to the 7 feet. So our frames here are 1.5 inches. I measure these here. And if they are in plan view, they're very likely going to be the same dimension at the top and bottom of the window. So for a door, if the door is 7 feet, then you add 1.5 inches. I could type in offset 7 feet 1.5, or I could just do the math and figure 85.5. Okay, so this is going to be the top of the window line. And if I had a door, it would be the top of the door line. All right, so now I can start copying these projection lines. So here we go. And I'll put them at every window frame and then the window opening. I'll do the same for this window. Just keep making copies. Copy, copy. Now I'm ready to draw these in. Before I do that though, I'm going to offset 1.5 for the top frame and for the bottom frame. Right, so in preparation for drawing those, I'm going to change my layer to A elevation light. If I use this blue line when I print, it's going to be way too heavy. You won't be able to sort of see the difference between these two lines that are very close together. And I will use the rectangle tool to construct these windows. So my first rectangle will be the overall, and then I'll draw the rectangles that represent the panes of glass, 2 of them in my case. And I'll do the same thing for the other window. Now you can see that object snap is on, and so it's capturing all those intersections. All right, those vertical lines, those projection lines, we've done with them. So I'm going to get rid of that just to keep my drawing a little less cluttered. And I also can erase these lines that represent the frames. Before I do that, let's say, for example, instead of having a window here, I had a door. So let's take a door and move it down here, rotate it around. I'll just move my window out of the way so you can kind of see what this might look like. And I'll complete this. I'm going to fill it. Same thing on this side. Bar, pull it back here. Let's go back here. Okay, So just for illustration purposes, and I can close this off so that line, that wall line is complete. Using the match command. One more time, match. So let's say that I have a door here instead, and I'll just go and copy my projection line CO, copy, 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 copy. Right, and I'm going to move this over out of the way so I can show you what a door would look like. All right, so it's very similar. I would just, instead of using the rectangle tool, maybe use a line tool, and I'm just going to trace this door around. Okay, and again, it's a 7-foot high door. So I missed my line here, it did not snap to the intersection, so let's fix that. Okay. There you go. That's what a door would look like on the elevation. All right, door, window. All right, next we're going to go and we're going to work on the section drawing. Kind of cleaned up the drawing a little bit, I put the window back. You know, for a typical house, there would be a lot more detail. You know, you might have something called a coping that's up here, and if you wanted to, you could add one of these. I would suspect that they would be about 4 inches. It's just like a little piece that covers the top of the roof and keeps water from getting in there. You know, I would put this on the A elevation light layer if you're going to add that. So in other words, I just offset that by 4 inches. But again, you do not need to include that. So plenty of time to learn how to construct buildings. All right, our next drawing is going to be a section. This is a little bit more complicated conceptually and otherwise. Basically, what you want to do is choose a spot somewhere in the project to cut your section. So it could be anywhere. I could make my section cut here, and then I'm going to show everything that I would see past that section line. Everything behind the section, this front part, would not be in my drawing. I could make the section cut here, and this one would cut through these 2 windows. I could make it here, and it would cut through a wall here and a window here. I could cut through it here, and it would be wall, wall, wall. Again, you know, we could go through the whole house and choose a different spot. Where do you normally choose the spot? Well, I would typically choose the spot that shows the most, not necessarily the most number of rooms, but the more interesting rooms. So would you want to cut through a closet versus a living room? Probably a living room. These drawings are often used to locate things on the walls, but sometimes they're used for presentation purposes, so you can show someone what your design intent is. All right, so for the purposes of this one, I will cut a section through these 2 windows, okay? Now I'm going to make a line here, and it doesn't really matter what layer it is on because it will be erased. But perhaps it makes sense to put it on the projection layer in case I forget to turn it off. That's going to be where my cut is. Now, I won't worry about this furniture. I just want to show the architecture. So by that, I mean the doors, the windows, the walls, stuff like that. All right. And one thing that I would always recommend when doing a section is before you draw all the stuff in the background, so like these doors are going to show in my section. Before doing that, I would always draw whatever I'm cutting through in this cutting plane. So that's going to be the ground, floor that runs along here, the ceiling, and these walls with their windows in them. Okay, so for this drawing, since I am going to focus on what's being cut, if you take a look at this elevation drawing, the only line that's being cut is that ground line. And that's because the ground is extending under us as we're looking at this plot or this elevation. I'm going to change my layer back to a section profile, and I'm going to trace over this line a section, a line representing the section. Okay, now, as I mentioned, you want to draw first stuff that we're cutting through. We're going to disregard the furniture. So what I'm going to do is make a copy of the projection line here. I know I'm going to cut through that wall, and I'm going to cut through this wall. So I'll start with projection lines in those two planes. Okay. Now remember, our ceiling height is 8 feet. So I'll offset 8 feet. And then I'll offset 1 foot or 12 inches for the structure of the ceiling. Okay, so right now I've got the top of the ceiling, or the roof, the bottom of the ceiling, and the two walls. So we can come and we can start to cut some stuff back. Okay, now also, if you remember, we set some heights for the sill. I made it 36, and I made the top of the window here 7 feet 1.5. So I'm going to offset that ground line for those. There's my sill. Here's my window head, if you recall that. And I can go and complete the profile of the head there. And I'm going to go line and produce the sill. And I'll do the same thing on the other side. And I can erase those. All right, now I'm also done with these two lines. I'm going to get them out of there because it's going to get a little confusing with more lines being drawn on top. Where the wall meets the ground, we want to erase this line. Okay, so I'm going to use the trim command and eliminate that. You can still see the line of the grid, but again, that's not going to print. I'm going to trim this one too. Okay, so that is all that's being cut through with these heavy lines. Now we still have to draw the windows, and we'll also draw some of these objects that are kind of located beyond the section cut. But we'll start with those windows. And I'm going to make a copy of this window that's up here, and I'm going to use that to construct my new window. So copy. I'll just, keeping that ortho set, I'll just bring it down like so. Now, this is something that I would suggest you do with caution. I'm going to actually explode this block. Now remember, this block was inserted into the floor plan previously. When you explode something, it reduces it down to its simple elements. So I'm going to click on X for explode. And now it's all just a bunch of lines. It's no longer one component. Okay. I'm also going to erase these frames, right? Those would be vertical frames, and to be consistent here, there's no vertical or no horizontal frames in my window. I've just got a top frame and a bottom frame. All right, now I already have this line here, so I can eliminate this one. And I also have some extra lines here that I can erase. So we'll leave it at that for now. Now watch carefully how I do this. You could copy these and move them and all that business. I'll show you a slightly faster way of completing this. I'm going to type in S for stretch. And I'm going to click here just above the frame and here just below it. Okay, then I'll press enter and I will stretch this from here down to here. Okay, what happened here with our jaggedy line? Something is misaligned. So let's double check the placement of the window in that plane. I'm going to make a projection. Looks like it's aligning with the wall here. Let's see if my copying should do it. Okay. Somehow those lines got slightly off. I'm going to make a correction, and then we'll proceed with our stretching. I think that's fixed. And so now I will repeat that. I'm going to use the stretch command, typed in S, grab that end there, bring it down. Okay. And I will also move this top one. Now, I don't want that top line, just going to move the frame, the blue parts. Okay, and I can use the stretch command again to bring these down. Now feel free to, use your own techniques for copying and moving and all of that business. But that is basically what I want to end up with, a window that looks like this. Right now, I have exactly the same window on this side, so I could mirror this. Let's type in MI for mirror, and I want to capture everything here. I don't need that cyan line or this cyan line. And my midpoint will be the middle. Here could be either the top or the bottom or the floor. Doesn't matter. And choose another point. Just make sure the line is vertical. Okay, so now I have the graphic for the windows. And the remaining parts would be to draw some of the lines that extend into the distance, right? Now again, maybe you want to set these to be on your projection layer. But I'm going to see this corner right here, the end of this wall. I'm going to see this opening. Okay, that's the first layer, and then I'll come back and add all those doors in the back, right? I'm going to change my layer to, this time I'm going to use a elevation medium because things are not really far in the distance, but not, they shouldn't be terribly heavy. This is a sort of a medium line weight. There's the end of the wall, there's the opening between the hallway and the dining room. All those lines. Okay, and then the last set of lines would be all of these doors that are in the distance. So for these, I'm going to go ahead and create projection lines. I'm going to bring them down. Let's change my layer to projection. And then I'll copy each of these. And every single one of them here. And this frame is also going to show. Okay. My door height, remember from the front, the south elevation will be 84. This time I'm going to change my line weight to a lighter line, and then I can go around and trace those projection lines. I'll offset the top of the door 1.5, and I will trace those too. All right, let's erase so you can see a little bit of those, and I'll erase the top ones, and I'm finished with this last one. I'm coming around here, 1, 2, 3, 4. Oops. I went too high on that one. Bring it down. And the top of the door here. All right, that is all that would show from this particular section. Right now, if I have a door located in, if this was a door instead of a window, okay, the way I would show that, and I'll show that quickly, I'll just erase this. Imagine that that's not there. There's that. A little simpler than the window. We're going to the door itself probably wants to be the same weight as the frame. So I would offset that. If you remember, we drew those doors at 1.75. So if the door is swinging into the space, that's what it would look like. That's it for the section. One thing that I forgot to draw here is that little bit of wall that extends out. Goes from here to here and down. I'm going to erase that projection line, and I'm going to match the layers. And match the source. And that concludes the section.